Hello and a very warm welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching India's World. I'm Frank Rausen Pereira. Well, the European Union has sought an early meeting for a new high-level mechanism with India to take forward discussions on a trade and investment agreement, Indian officials said on Thursday. The two sides had agreed to set up the high-level mechanism during the India-EU summit in July. The EU's Trade Commissioner raised the matter with the Indian side and discussions are underway to have a meeting of the mechanism soon, said the External Affairs Ministry. Meanwhile, External Affairs Minister S Jaishankar had said on Wednesday that India is interested in a fair and balanced free trade pact with EU. Referring to a long-delayed proposal for a free trade agreement with EU, Jaishankar said that the Indian government had spoken of the need to resume negotiations on this. Meanwhile, India and Luxembourg on Thursday held their first bilateral summit in 2 decades and signed 3 agreements, even as discussions on the India-EU trade agreement were initiated by New Delhi. Out of 6 recent virtual summits, India has had 4 with European countries, that is the EU itself, Denmark, Italy and Luxembourg. In this edition of India's World, we will analyze the way forward for an India-Europe free trade agreement. Joining me on the program today are Gurjeet Singh, former ambassador, Umu Salma Bawa, Professor, Centre for European Studies, JNU, and Pramit Pal Chowdhury, Foreign Affairs Editor of the Hindustan Times. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of India's World. All right, Pramit, let me start the program with you. Let's first put into perspective all the developments that have taken place really as far as the India-EU FTA is concerned over the past week.
Yes, I think there's a degree of urgency now, both by the European Union and India, to try and conclude what has been now several years of negotiations for a free trade agreement. One is that the world trade system is under deep stress, thanks to both the unilateralism on the case of the United States under the Trump administration, as well as increasing, should we say, assertiveness by China on a number of other issues besides trade. India, the European Union is seeing Great Britain, its third largest economy, will be leaving sometime, presumably at the end of this year. And between India and the European Union, we've seen, for example, India refuse to review or revive the bilateral investment treaties with a large number of European countries. But at the same time, India has argued that they need to get a smaller, lighter, but broader, if you wish, FTA with the European Union that incorporates preferably services, some immigration, digital economic issues as well. So there's a desire on both sides to rebuild reinforce the trade relationship. There's a slightly less ambitious agenda on both sides. And there's a desire as well, I said on both sides, because the international trading system is in such stress, to conclude an agreement preferably as fast as possible.
Right. Ambassador, let's also not forget that there has been a major development on the RCEP front too, where India walked out, of course, last year. But this year, the RCEP has gone through and it is come into existence. Of course, the nations now have to take it back and then it has to be ratified over the next 2 years. That is presumably will take place and go through as well. But considering that the RCEP has happened, does it now place more pressure on India to try and formalize and work out FTAs with other nations and more so the FTA with Europe?
Well, indeed, as you say, RCEP was signed. But RCEP was signed on the 15th of November. By the 20th of November, the APEC has had its summit and they have decided that there will be a free trade agreement of the Asia-Pacific, which basically brings in all the countries of RCEP, the TPP and NAFTA. So, this is something huge which is being planned, though its quality is something which they need to discuss over the next several years. And please remember that in neither of these, the APEC, RCEP or TPP, is India involved. So whatever we may say about India's involvement in trade pacts, our current idea is not to get involved in them, and ministers of government have said so. On the other hand, whenever we are having these frequent meetings with Europe, and you have mentioned 4 online summits. But if you look at EAM summits and you look at foreign secretaries' recent physical visits to the UK, France, and Germany, we are trying to get Europe to take a more strategic view of India, in which the free trade agreement has to be at the core, but in a strategic sense. Now, Mr. Pramit Pal Chaudhary has well pointed out some of the dichotomies and difference in approaches. But I don't think the Europeans are ready to do an agreement light. There are 27 countries. To get them all to agree to a new format only for India is not easy. And that is why India at the June India-EU summit agreed to this new idea of a political engagement which you have mentioned. Now, this political engagement could not take off because the EU Commissioner for Trade quit and they had to find a new one. And the new one has been appointed recently. He is, I think, a former Prime Minister of Latvia. And he, along with the former Italian Prime Minister, who is the Commissioner for the Economy, would play a critical role in determining the European Union's approach. Having said this now, there are three segments of the India-EU BTIA, Bilateral Trade and Investment Agreement. There is trade, there is services, and most importantly, there is investment. Now, when, as Mr. Chaudhary mentioned, India did not continue with the bilateral trade agreements with various countries since 2016, what essentially happened was that the trade insurance and investment guarantees with the European Investment Bank and other banks could provide have ceased. Now, there is a promotion of investment in India. After all, the European Union has almost, I think, $90 billion of investment in India. And India has close to, I think, 60 billion euros worth of investment in Europe. Now, these are working without the cover of bilateral investment promotion treaties. And if you got such a treaty, it would facilitate investment both ways and protect it. We are setting up various measures in India and facilities for Europeans and others that if you have investment problems, we will solve them through these special fast-track windows. But we are forgetting that we need these insurance and guarantees as well. So therefore, I think India's approach is to focus on having an investment agreement first and leave the trade and services for negotiation later. And that is why you need this political agreement to do it step by step.
Absolutely. All right. Talking about political agreement, and talking about how there are fundamental challenges really as far as an FTA with Europe is concerned. Salma Baba, is there political will really at this point in time to try and get an agreement done? And maybe, as soon as possible, maybe not in the next 6 to 8 months, but they can thrash out these differences over the next year or so and work out some kind of a formula. Is there a political will though?
I think you can see the beginnings of a political will over here. And I think as we speak, and both the speakers have also pointed out, there is a geopolitical shift that needs to be acknowledged in what has happened. COVID has created a huge issue about trust and the ability to, which kind of partners you want to undertake business. So there is a window of opportunity which is opened up. Europeans also have become alerted to China's role in the pandemic and the post-pandemic period. It's a big question for New Delhi to ask, how do we strategize this and leverage this moment which has opened up? And also address, I think, squarely what are our challenges? What is it that we want to have in an FTA? As Mr. pointed out just now, we are at this point not in any FTA. If we consider that to be our advantage, how do we then capitalize on the moment which has opened up? So I think going forward, there are 3 points over here. First, I would take the 15th July summit, which was the 15th summit. The fact that a new political mechanism has been identified would be seen as a welcome development. That means there is a high-level political intentionality. I think that is the starting point of it. Second, the visits of the Foreign Secretary and the very fact that a couple of days back, Jaishankar also pointed out that while it will be difficult to, have a FTA with the EU, the fact that they're pursuing it also, in my mind, underlines that yes, it is definitely on the table. Third, I think at this point you can't afford to be lax. You will not get this opportunity. The Prime Minister has himself pointed out on the need of diversifying the global supply chains. So I think there is a certain point of convergence that we do see over here. New Delhi would also have to see that despite the FTAs, absence of FTAs, business has not suffered. But I think definitely what you would also see is maybe some kind of a shift to first going for a PTA, a preferential trade agreement, going for the early harvest. That will, build trust. And that can then facilitate going in for the difficult issues. What we should not forget is there is no going back to the agenda of 2007. A lot of water has flown under the bridge. These trade negotiations are far more complex. We have got all the WTO issues over here. Mode 1 to Mode 4 has come in. We've got the issue of, high-skilled labor and services, procurement. So which means along with that, new technology is also changing the way business is being conducted and done. So the further you go away from the starting point of 2007, the far more complex it is. And perhaps this political facilitation would now bring up three different kind of agreements, rather than clubbing everything into one basket. And what we saw was the absolute stop of the negotiations. So I think there is the fact that Europe has reached out. It finds a mention on the Strategic Roadmap 2025 and in the joint statement, I think is the affirmation that there is political intentionality. It's now about working down the details.
Absolutely. All right. So taking the discussion forward and, talking about capitalizing on the moment, Pramitpal Chaudhary, do you believe that as far as, the deliverables are concerned as well, both parties need not be too ambitious, so they can tone down a little bit? That way we can actually see something fruitful and something positive coming out?
Well, I think that's what the Indian side would like. It'll be difficult because, as the others too have mentioned, the EU is ultimately a conglomeration of nations, all of whom, at least the major economies, each have something on the agenda that they will push on. But going for an early harvest will allow you to clump together some of the easier bits and pieces of the agreement and get them done at the beginning, and then kind of hope that the more difficult issues will be resolved later. There'll be some, I suspect, resistance in the European Union for fear that that will mean that all the difficult parts will never be done at all. And the early harvest will be all that will be accomplished. And certain things, notably dairy products and automobiles, wine and alcohol, these are things that have very big lobbies within the European Union system. So, as I said, hopefully the combination of the pressure presently, that the desire to rebuild confidence in the world trade system, plus the political engagement and geopolitical convergence that we're seeing, stronger convergence we're seeing between the European and India, will have Brussels shift its position a bit. I think India, as you've mentioned, is under its own little pressure because of the having to walk out of RCEP. But it'll also be looking at the United Kingdom. It's already begun the preliminary negotiations with the UK for an FTA. It had worked out the outline for a mini trade deal with the United States under the Trump administration. Both of them are potentially something that could be done by India, maybe next year if the Biden administration is interested. The UK will definitely be interested because if Brexit does go through and they have a hard Brexit, as they say, a very severe economic cutoff from Europe, they desperately need to get new FTAs. And again, India is hoping that the format of the UK and the mini US deal, which focuses a lot more on digital trade, digital investment services, and a bit of immigration, could act as a model for the European Union and try to push them to recognize that the traditional FTA regimes of the past, which almost always focused on tariffs of goods more than anything else, is somewhere that the European Union should start to be looking at if they hope to get something done with India rapidly.
That's an interesting aspect. Ambassador, do you believe that we can keep some of the sticking issues away from the agenda, some of the contentious issues, focus on a mini trade deal of sorts like the one that Pramit just spoke about that we had with the United States?
I think at present, despite the German leadership of the European Union, we still don't have a practical approach from their side. I am not confident at all that they are going to agree to a piecemeal deal. They are still looking for a comprehensive deal in which there are many elements which are unacceptable to India. I have yet to see an EU paper which talks about this step-by-step or a different approach. Now, if you see even the German paper on the Indo-Pacific policy, on which presumably the EU policy will be based, it talks a lot about trade with India and ASEAN. But the problems in this trade are not being resolved through strategic intent. That is missing. And that is what this political dialogue was supposed to do. Now, if you look at our trade, our neighbors have got all kinds of GSP preferences, which we have graduated from. So what we want is that the non-agricultural manufactured goods that India has should get access to Europe at some concession, so we remain competitive with our neighbors. But look at Vietnam. Vietnam has already succeeded in having an FTA with the EU or whatever quality. And the British are looking to join the TPP. So the differences are many. Secondly, if you look at the services segment, I think there is a loss of push from the Indian side. The Indian IT companies were always the big movers in this, but when they saw nothing happening over many years, most of them invested in data centers in Europe. So they have abided by European rules and they don't really see a major benefit coming out of any new FTA, except that companies in India which did not invest in data centers will now get the same access. So I think that is not going to happen. But the Europeans have a large number of services issues. They want to bring in the Hong Kong issues on labor, on sustainability, on green and this and that. So I think we are uncomfortable with those. That is why India would ideally like the investment part, because that investment flows are continuing and those could get better. And that is what India needs. And if you want some amount of decoupling or reduction of dependence on China, Europe is a good source to link with. And if you talk to companies in the bigger European countries, they agree with this. But the European Union is not run by the big European countries anymore. The smaller countries play a very large and disproportionate role. So I think there is where, when Dr. Jaishankar says we want a just and balanced trade agreement, I think that is where the problem lies. How to get the just and balance out of the European Union.
Absolutely. All right. So let's bring in another aspect, something that was touched upon earlier in the program as well. Salma Baba, considering the changing geopolitical scenario, considering how, Europe has changed its stand as far as the Indo-Pacific is concerned as well. From a strategic point of view, clearly, Europe seems to be tilting towards India and, away from China. So can we use the strategic aspect as a leverage to try and get something out on the trade front?
So what we do have is that we have a French position and we have a German position, and what is still not there on the table is a European Union-wide position. So which means that there is going to be perhaps some kind of the German-French template since they've already have an alliance for multilateralism. That having been said, I think the EU still is in a very nascent position to develop Indo-Pacific. What it does see that there is this opportunity which COVID has introduced, but I don't think all members are on board as far as trying to go away. The fact that you've had the 16+1, on the BRI become a 17+1 also tells you that one should not be oblivious to the fact that everything in Brussels moves smoothly just because the two larger players have put out Indo-Pacific policy. Having said that, I think it's a welcome indication. It also shows you that as a fallout of the Trump administration transatlantic relationship, there has been a definite push in Berlin and under the current presidency to articulate it far more strongly than Germany would have otherwise done. So that one could use as some kind of a litmus test to say that Brussels would be looking in that direction, and there are strong indicators that this is being developed, from what one has spoken to officials in Brussels. But a policy is only a starting point. The next would be, okay, once you've indicated it, how do you intend to, make it happen? If you look at the RCEP, and we were, just a few weeks back talking about the Squad taking place, the RCEP also brings members of the Squad into a trade agreement. So, what will, trump one over the other? Trade is what is your bread and butter of the everyday. Defense and strategic issues become critical when, you have those kind of break or make points. So we also see that everybody is strategizing and leveraging. Developments in the Indo-Pacific and in the Asia-Pacific notwithstanding, and the Squad taking place and the Malabar exercise recently also tells us that both Australia, Japan, South Korea also are looking at how they can strengthen their own position. And so while they may do a Squad exercise, Japan and the others may come in on these negotiations, they also recognize they have to live in that part of the world. So I think geography is very extremely crucial over here. We are thinking geostrategically, but you would need to convert a lot of more of that into deliverables. And that, I think, is a very, very slow process. And as has been said by the other discussants as well, at this point, even without an FTA, the India-EU, we are doing good business. And that's because we have complementarity, even with the US economy. But you can't continue with this kind of, an equation. If the world is coming together into these trade blocks, if you don't take a stand where you want to be, on which side and on what conditions, the danger is that you will be out of it, right? And the others would have already made a deal for themselves. So it's imperative for New Delhi as well to decide what it wants and how does it want to engage with some of these partners who, let's not forget, are also our strategic partners, be it the US, be it the UK or even the European Union, Germany and France as well. So I think it's also essential for New Delhi to ask, how do you leverage? These points of leverage are not going to be open indefinitely. You've seen from last year to today, to this 1 year, what COVID has done universally and globally, but China has moved ahead. So there is a very strong leadership element which is coming from that part of the world, and New Delhi will have to then ask, how best does it leverage with its strategic partners to bring it the political advantage that it seeks. You cannot indefinitely stay in limbo.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, time to get closing comments now from all my panelists with the best way forward. Starting first with you, Pramit.
So we need to get to talk to the EU on trade, not only because of the existing EU negotiations FTA negotiations that we've had for the past few years, but the fact that there's a new set of items on global trade's agenda. One of them is the digital side, as mentioned. Another is this new push, mainly in the Indo-Pacific, but can incorporate Europe. There are some interest in it, at least from France and a few other countries, of the idea of moving supply chains and reduce out of China, reducing the Chinese footprint. And the third issue I'll add, which is going to be very important next year, EU will introduce some form of carbon tariffs. In other words, tariffs that will attempt to include the cost of failed carbon capture or sequestration in an economy. And those will impact particularly heavy industry, steel and other products, mainly from China and Russia, but it will also hit us as well. The Biden administration, I gather, has already indicated it will follow the European Union on that front as well. So you're going to see a brand new issue in trade that we need to begin talking about, which is the issue of carbon and climate in trade.
Absolutely. Ambassador.
I fully agree with what Mr. Pal Chaudhary has said. And I think there is a sanctimonious element to the European negotiating style. And that is what leads Dr. Jaishankar to ask for just and balanced terms. Now, this sanctimony is not reduced by their strategic vision of the Indo-Pacific. And if you read the German paper on Indo-Pacific, it actually is China plus. It doesn't talk about China. It simply talks about working with the rest of us. And they don't want to nudge the relationship with China in the economic sense. Whereas we are building a strategic partnership to which we want to add economic elements. And that is the challenge for us. And if we want resilient value chains, China plus or China minus, we need the Europeans, particularly Germany and France, to take a strategic view of engaging India. And that is the difficulty, how to carry the EU 27 along.
Right. And Salma Bawa, close the show for us with your quick concluding remark.
So I would say, I think New Delhi will have to decide what kind of political and economic trade-offs it is, going to do. Where is it going to give a little bit? Where is it going to receive? Second, the fact that a high-level dialogue has been mentioned, I think both sides need to set the agenda. I think you need to have a calendar to even start off. So that is extremely important. Otherwise, you get, long periods without any deliverables. And third, strategizing now, in particular for New Delhi, in this window of opportunity to see how you could actually garner upon the new administration coming in Washington and the kind of positive mood which will be generated within the European Union. Notwithstanding the challenges which have been pointed out, I think we could look at how, some of the agreements can be pushed forward to achieve at least some kind of deliverables that can, I think, set the momentum for a more comprehensive dialogue and a trade agreement.
Okay, all right. On that note, then, I'll call it a wrap on this edition of India's World. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. What's coming out of this discussion is that India and the EU are serious about getting a pact done as soon as possible as far as trade is concerned. There is a desire on both sides to reinforce the trade relations. There is a high-level political will as well from EU and India, but getting everyone from the 27-member EU on the same page is going to be an uphill task. There's a great opportunity for India right now to work out some kind of a deal, and this window is not going to remain open forever, so we need to act soon. We need to get serious really about what we want and ensure that we capitalize on the present geopolitical opportunity that is before us, especially with what COVID has done and the world looking away from China. Well, with that, it's a wrap. See you again next time.